During my most recent professional experience placement, I was asked to do a lesson plans for a unit on number systems and patterns. Started by checking the content of this subject by going to the Victorian curriculum and looking from levels 3 to levels 8, because that's the level of ability that was in my grade 5-6 class that I would have to be covering. I then planned activities and sat through and did these activities myself, so I knew the content, and also I was able to answer any questions that the students might have on these activities because I was fully informed about what they were. The class was grouped in ability levels from circles, triangles, squares, pentagons and hexagons. So the more points they had, the higher ability level they had. But for my activities, I put them into three ability groups, keeping the circles on their own, and then grouping the triangles and squares because there wasn't much between them, and again the pentagons and hexagons. But within those activities, I made sure that I was meeting the full range of differentiation of questions for those students within those groups. At the beginning of each lesson, I would make explicit what the learning goal was, and we would talk about the success criteria required to meet that goal, and students would self-assess themselves by giving themselves a number, 1 to 4. So they'd hold their fingers up, 1 being novice, 2 apprentice, 3 practitioner and 4 expert, and they would then write this number in their book. So this number represented where they thought they currently sat or their understandings currently were. I would then scaffold them with the information they needed to complete the activities, and I would send them off into their groups. I would always ensure that I would set up the lower group and be checking in on them, and I would always come back to them at the end and ask them questions to ensure that they had met the learning goal, so that they could answer the same question as the rest of the class when I said, did we meet this learning goal? And that would let them experience the success they needed. It was really important for me to be walking around the class and ensuring that everyone was at the right level. If students were struggling, I would offer them the activity the level down without letting them know that it was a level down, so they could still meet the learning goal but just through a different pathway. And the same for the people that were finding it too easy. I always made sure I had an extended activity and enough activities to keep those students engaged, and quite a lot of them would try the next level up, and they would even stay in their own time to try and work with me on finding out solutions on a couple of the questions they were particularly interested in. So it was really nice for me to see students engaged in maths that way. The first 2 lessons, the integration aid stayed with the lower group to make sure they were scaffolded the whole time. And the 3rd lesson, I sat with them just so I really had an understanding of where they were at and probably pushed them a little bit further than they normally would be. And for the 4th lesson, I actually did multi-ability, and I grouped students, extended students with lower students for the same whole class activity, so that they could reinforce their learning by teaching the lowers, and the lowers would get something out of it because the extended people would be explaining it to them. And it worked really well, and it was really nice to see the 2 different kinds of differentiation working in the classroom for myself. So at the end of the lesson, we would come back to the learning goal, and I would get them to put their fingers up again to see how far they thought they'd had moved that lesson. And without a doubt, most of them had, or all of them had moved at least 1 or 2 numbers up, and then they would write that in their book so that we could reference that as an assessment. And then we sort of tried to incorporate the different learning styles by using ICT and visual images, hands-on work, so everyone sort of was covered in that differentiation.